Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Whispers of the Deep. My name is Draken. Today we are going over Chapter 14, Ekkin 4. So, Ekkin 4 is a continuation of the Siege of Green Navria plotline, specifically where we talk about Ekkin's quest with his friends Bruno and Valerius to get under the walls and then open the gate from the inside. We also get more about corpse hints in this chapter, but the main concern of this chapter is Ekkin and what sort of person Ekkin is. This chapter does have a lot going on as per usual and is also one of the longer chapters so far. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the epigraph basically is from the Norrøn history, a book we've already seen a lot of epigraphs from. This epigraph in particular talks about the methods by which the empire in Noria has expanded. So first we have the idea of military conquest, that they annexed the Principality of Old Elon after Old Elon supposedly waged a war against the Empire in Noria. This is meant to mirror the Roman idea that Rome only fights defensive wars. So of course, Caesation, when writing this history, says that Old Elon was the one who waged the war. The city is the one who waged the war against the Empire in Noria, when most likely it was actually the Empire in Noria doing a preemptive strike against the city state, or perhaps the city state being provoked into a war by the Empire. And then we have the lore about Eridonia is furthermore from Lucian 3, I believe, which is about preemptively surrendering. And then we have Nornia, which is bequeathed inheritance, and Vilnia, which is proposed cultural kinship. These two here have actually happened in history where if there is an uncertain succession, the leader upon their deathbed may bequeath the kingdom to some other monarch of a nearby kingdom, joining them together. And then we know that Erdonia preemptively surrendered and instead of suffering a war, offered themselves to join the Empire in Noria. As for Vilnia, the idea of a proposed cultural kinship is a strange one. So Vilnia is one of the mandates in the northeast of the empire. However, the Mycenaeans, the founding people of the Empire in Noria, supposedly, they are actually from the south. So this idea of proposed cultural kinship means that either it's the native Kalaeans of the Empire in Noria having a cultural kinship to the Vilnians, or it's the Mycenaeans saying actually Vilnia was founded in ancient days by Mycenaeans in some kind of theory of hyper diffusion or something like that. And then we have more lore about Volos, the deserts of Volos, and the Nemorias, which they entered via royal marriage, which is also something that's fairly common. And then finally we get to Villand, once the Holy Kingdom of Kertar, mentioned way back in Ekkin 2, where Dominic Terrans talks about Villandi wine. So we now learn that Villand was actually once called the Holy Kingdom of Kertar, and the Kertari came from this kingdom. However, the Kertari were destroyed, their civilization was destroyed and they were scattered to the winds. The Kertari do feature prominently in this chapter. So, begin with they took the arms and left the bodies. This calling back to the arms at the beginning of the chapter is, as usual, a reference to the Aeneid. However, as with this paragraph in particular, likes playing with the designation of pronouns and where a pronoun is used actually and what it refers to. So it says they took the arms and left the bodies for Ekkin, but they belong to the rats. It's unclear if that's the bodies or that's Ekkin and his companions. So they belong to the rats, the bits he and the others hadn't already scavenged. But this the bits of the armor or the bits of the people? But Ekkin has his broken ribs, and they are a gnawing pain at his chest, the dead captain's parting gift. So Ekkin is very hard on himself in a way that's similar to Fortuna being hard on themselves, but Ekkin is hard on himself because he expects better. He expects him to. Ekkin berates himself as someone who's weak and useless when Fortuna berates themselves as someone who is incredibly competent but isn't quite good enough. But here, with this idea of Ekkin having a pain in his chest, specifically the idea of a vulture in his ribs, is meant to make you think of Prometheus, and this idea of Ekkin having suffered so others could benefit. But also, the whole thing of Prometheus is the question of Prometheus steals fire from the gods and gives it to men, but was that worth it? Because sure, it means people don't suffer as much from animals, but the fire, this power to create and destroy, is also the generator of different types of conflict. And then Ekkin later will be opening the gates to the city to let in a different type of conflict. So there's the question of essentially an ambivalent Prometheus is one of the sub-themes of this chapter, whether or not are the things Ekkin doing a good thing? And also what does Ekkin think of people? And also finally, what is Ekkin's sort of character? He says, useless, you couldn't even resist a single blow, weakling. And then they see the plaza. So the plaza is dark except for a bonfire. And this is the idea of this is the fire that Prometheus steals. We have we have a 10, we have 14, 6 and 6 and 4. 6 and no, 6 and 4 and 4. 14 people around the fire, and these are meant to represent people to an extent. But before that, we have the statue of Aziz Monomachos, Aziz who fights alone. Monomachos being a Greek title which literally means mono, alone, machos from mache, battle. So Aziz Monomachos literally means Aziz who fights alone, or Aziz, he who fights alone, or he who solos, if you would. And correspondingly, Aziz, this dead god of the Chileans, the dead god of the Navrians, my bad, is wearing a plumed helmet only. So he's wearing a big helmet on his head, and he has a sword in each hand in a striking a pose. However, Aziz also has a broken heart. This is all one gigantic reference, but to a bunch of different things. But I think it is notable that the Green Navrians, a people whose city has been sacked 8 times, including what happens in this chapter, that their god, one of their gods is a river, and the other god is a dead warrior. And I think that's quite telling about what sort of people the Navrians are and their idea about persevering despite being at the whims of the more powerful red and blue Navrias within the kingdom of Navria, of three Navrias. So Ekkin, however, while he's learned enough to know who Aziz Monomachos is, he does not remember all the stories, namely what Aziz died from, although it must be symbolized somehow as a broken or torn out heart. And then finally, we have, although this god is actually one of the Munin, which is all the gods outside the order of the Temple of the Triarchy, and its sanctioned worships of Numen. So, because of that, this Aziz, this heroic figure, is a demon in the eyes of the Triarchy, and that feels kind of messed up, but also Ekkin is not thinking about it too hard. And then we have the humans huddled around the dart, 6 and 4 and 4, so 14 people. Actually, we note that it was 6 people in the troop that Ekkin fought in the previous chapter, and then there's 14 here, which is 12 plus 2, 2 to guard the gates, 12 other soldiers in the plaza, and then later there's 6 people in the guardhouses. So it seems the Kertari, at least, like to do things in troops of 6. So of the 14 people, there are 2 actually guarding the door. There are 2 who are just kind of chilling around with this billowing clay cup, which is filled with mellis root extract. It's a sedative that's used for recreation. And then the rest are either marching back and forth, not really accomplishing much. And then there are 6 huddling around the bonfire. So when you put these all together, this is meant to be a sort of tableau of the different roles that people have in society, or the different like states people in there. The people actually doing the job. They're the people just the people just hanging around. They're the people sort of off in their own land, and then they're the people who are seeming useful and might actually be useful, but it's unclear. And then Corpse Hands notes about this that he says, "Look at them," which is both like a contentious look at these worthless excuses for mercenaries just huddled around, not doing anything. They're so bad at their job. But it's also, look at them, ecce homines, behold the humans, which is a mock on Pontius Pilate's behold the man ecce homo, which is meant to show Jesus being like in a sort of degraded position. So Corpse Hansla is like, but behold, it's humanity in all of its different aspects. And he's incredibly contemptuous of them. And then he says, but still, to May Frostafir, you have until dawn. Yes, this is a rhetorical question. Corpse Hands knows they have only until dawn. And Ekkin winces, and he says, yes, the attack is for dawn, if not earlier. And then Corpse Hands is all on top of Corpse Hands having knowledge of the city and knowledge of Ekkin and being incredibly skilled in language and rhetoric. He also knows star charts and it's able to tell the time of night based off what positions the stars are in the sky. So corpse hands is very, very, very good. And then what you propose in Valerius spat hand on this forlorn saber because corpse hand still has the blade. And corpse hand says the same axiom guiding you three to seize by trickery but force cannot, which sounds similar to what Volp and his courier say in Ekkin 2 and 3. So he says several days I endured, making it sound like the time in the city was not good, or he didn't accomplish what he wanted. The streets are no great mystery to me, which is this is a rhetorical device called litotes, which essentially you say if you want to say strong, for instance, you say not. You can say not very weak, or if you want to say smart, you say not dumb. So they're saying that the streets are no great mystery. He's saying I know the streets very, very well. Although he apparently didn't know the guard shifts very well because they have got themselves pinned behind in front of 14 guards, and also they ran into 6 earlier. So, but he knows the weaknesses of the city, and Corpse Hands gives this incredibly elaborate medical metaphor. He says, but first he says, although disparate in form, humanity is united in body, and this is questionable. So by disparate in form, he's most likely talking to about what form means in most of the story, which is essentially essence. Although humanity has different essences, they are united in body, which is the opposite of what's actually true. You think that actually it's like, oh, all people are fundamentally the same, that we're all humans, but our bodies are different. But Corpsins is saying the exact opposite. He's saying that actually humans' bodies are all relatively the same, but human souls are different. There are different like tiers of people made of different metals, you would say, to use Plato's allegory of different humans being made of different metals, and then certain metals being better than others, which is problematic, shall we say. But Corpse Hands brushes is completely disregards that part and says that humans are all bodily the same, essentially, and says as such, all works of men copy the body and structure. Essentially, that because humans have a head and lungs and a stomach and 2 arms and 2 legs, that at least in generally speaking, that all human institutions like a business or a fraternity or a government or an army, that any institution or even maybe a house is built in a similar way to the way the human body is physically constructed because it is a universal frame of reference. So, Corpsen says that it's just like that with a city under siege. That like a so now he swaps one metaphor for another, like a city with under siege or a wrestler their foe. One may see that to strike a particular organ or joint will cause the body to founder. Essentially, this is if you're fighting someone in a wrestling match or a boxing match, because boxing is not a thing in this world, at least not here, that punching them in a certain spot, say in where one of their joints are weak or where they're off balance or in some particularly sensitive area, that will cause them to fall over. So and Corpsen saying that we essentially need to find the right place to punch the city, and then it will fall over. And he says that Queen Carmene, guarding her citadel with the rest of the true Navians, implying that Keratari are not true Navrians, they're a different ethnic group after all, has forsaken the bones with the heart, the bones being the walls of the city and the heart being the citadel itself. Most unwise. And Flares asks, what? And Corpsen says, south here there's a house which lives the spirit of Embervid herself. In this house is a sacred pool which collects the body of the god. So, in our modern world, like if from a, say, Abrahamic perspective, we are used to this idea that the divine is something which is either omnipresent, which is like it is in literally everything and therefore can't be distilled, or that it is literally immaterial, that it cannot be felt, touched, or perceived in any way, except through like a true knowing. So, this contrasts to many, 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 many pre-modern religions where, or even some religions existent today, where things, where geographic geographic features, mountains, rivers, certain trees, certain animals, the sun itself, are not like representations of the god. It is literally the god itself. So to the Navrians, the the river Emravid is literally the body of their god. It is their god. So going down to the Emravid, you are literally drinking and taking the body of the god into yourself. Or if you are washing with the water of the river Emravid, you are washing in the body of your god. So there's apparently a canal which runs from the river to a temple, and then this temple, this sacred pool, is considered to be the true body of the god, even more so than the river itself. And then there are sacred geese, which usually live in the body of the god. So these geese are sacred. And then he says that this house of the god, i.e., a temple, is old and made of wood. And then should something befall Lady Emerald's house, her house be destroyed somehow, even a foreign blade might take notice, which would be a distraction to take the Kertari away. And then Corpse Hands immediately transforms like a chameleon, takes off his old armor and puts on a stealth uniform essentially. And Valerius hisses. Valerius very has much like a more animalistic side, where Bruno is much more composed and humane. And Corpse Hands is traveling light, and then Valerius entreats Ekkin to not let this happen. And we got this thing. We got again. Corpse Hands is nameless. We don't know who he is really. And then Ekkin asks Corpse Hands about the statement of being someone of no consequence. So is of some no of someone of no consequence. And Corpse Hands says, my name only matters. A name or even like a concept only matters so much in the things it's referenced to. So, for instance, the word chair doesn't mean anything intrinsically. It only means something because we ascribe it value, meaning the thing which we use to identify the concept of a chair. And Corpse Hands is saying it's the same things with people's names, that a person's name has no value except that which evokes the actions of that person. So, for instance, say someone with the name Julius. If they have the name Julius, that might make you think of people who've had the name Julius in the past, say a certain Roman general, which might be then a wish or a sort of quasi prayer by the people giving the name that this person named Julius will hold similar characteristics of this other person named Julius. Or if say you have a person named like Sam, and this person Sam is named after someone else named Sam, then this person named Sam would have there's this implicit hope that this person named Sam would carry the either positive or negative qualities of this other person named Sam. So similarly with a name, the name means nothing as long as the the deeds the name is in reference to mean nothing. And then Corpse Hands does this little play on words, which says, I have yet proved myself in things said, shown, and performed. So things said, shown, and performed are actually the three aspects of the Eleusinian mysteries: things said, things shown, things performed, which is how one becomes initiated. However, I have yet proved myself is a play on words because yet can mean not yet, but also can mean already. So I have yet proved myself mean I have already proved myself as someone whose name is of consequence and who's someone whose deeds matter. But he also could be saying, this ain't nothing yet. I still have more. So it can be taken either way. Now Valerius falls to a knee because there's this idea that when you are entreating someone, asking them to do something for you, you get on a lower level than them. And this is like seen in the Iliad where Thetis um wraps her arms around Zeus's legs and then reaches up and like grabs his chin. And this is a classic body language for imploring someone. And at least I can let me come this man. Well, if this is yet another ploy, and then Corpse Hands drops the cold line. If a ploy this was, you would already be dead. That Corpse Hands did save them from the other soldiers in Ekkin 3, and Corpse Hands could have just not. Or with Corpse Hands being such a good fighter after he'd gotten his strength back from the food in Ekkin 3, he could have just killed the three of them if he really wasn't on their side. And of course, Valerius, after being told that he's already dead, says, What? And Corpse Hands, again, going off of the motif of the previous chapter, completely disregards what Valerius has to say. Corpse Hands, you would already be dead, Flares. What? Corpse Hands continues. He says, My Lord Helster grant me this task alone. Another head instead of hands would only bloat me, which is a very questionable imagery because head and hands are things that are left behind if the body is used for purposes, shall we say. And bloating is what happens both to corpses, but also people who've eaten too much. So corpse sense is either saying, "Oh, that I would become a dead body if given more head and hands." That it means that that would mean, oh, he'd get me killed. That I would become a bloated corpse if I was given the head and hands of Valerius to help me. But he also might be saying that, oh, having Valerius's body and leaving only behind his head and hands would make me stuffed because I have eaten him. With again going back to the quasi-cannibalistic motif and themes of Ekkin 3. Besides, his head and hands are needed elsewhere, which they are, frankly. And then Corpse turns to leave and says, when dawn approaches, look above, I put my defense in the justice web. Say, this line being a callback to Ekkin 1, which suggests that's a linguistic idiom in it's a linguistic idiom or saying in either high or low Norian, whichever language they're talking in currently. But also when he says when dawn approaches, look above, this is another one of Corpsense's predictions, which doesn't come true. So Eckenhaver looks up and sees that the sky's growing lighter. However, we know in the summer there's this long, like hour and a half long period of basically twilight before the dawn actually breaks. So they actually have a good amount of time. And then he says hurry quickly, which is a mock of the corre lente, hurry slowly, featured in the myth of Apollo and Daphne. But he's saying hurry quickly, like go really, really fast. And Valerius is going to say something, but instead just gives the saber back to Corpse Hands. And Corpse Hands notes that it was the other blade because Corpse Hands is really, really good. So tell him the shift cane was unlocked 3 times and twice again. This knocking is a motif, and like realistically, I could have some other knocking motif, but that might come later. So without the foreign prisoner ran south, silent as snow, just a nice little alliteration, south, silent snow. While Valerius gaze trained with them, Bruno basically just goes with this whole like stone type motif and stops. And Ekkin waits. And he can't rest. Useless. When Ekkin is saying useless, he's actually calling himself useless. So Ekkin gets up and peers into the distance up to get his janitors. Janitor literally mean like janitor is someone who guards a door. So that's why the term janitor is being used here. They are keeping the gate clean, but also keeping the gate closed. So, and they are gazing longingly at the 2 mercenaries who are the ones drugged out of their minds on Melis root extract. And he calls them disorganized, indolent, worthless excuses for mercenaries. But those Kertari still numbers. Calling them a Kertari betrays Ekkin's biases. More in this chapter, we will learn about lore about the Kertari, but also lore about Ekkin's biases and bigotry against them. We'll get to that later, though. But he grit his teeth. Why did the histories make these things so easy? Trap them in a valley, poison the wells, give gifts, then attack during the truce. Know the festival days and attack, then flood the fields with rising tides or a broken dam, and so on and so forth. These are all war crimes. But also these are textbook examples of how one army can win against another when outnumbered. So specifically, the trapping them in a valley is something that can happen in mountainous terrain. Poisoning the wells can happen. It's happened in history. The flooding fields with the rising tide is actually something that apparently happened in the Second Punic War. And then distracting people with wicker soldiers is something that happens in I believe it's the histories of Herodotus. But when you put these together, these are also examples of things that could happen in the future. But Ekkin doesn't have any of these ways to completely fuck over the enemies. He has no high ground, no wells, no wine, no truce days, no sea, no dams, no ropes, no wicker soldiers. Only 3 men down their luck behind the enemies, all he had to wait. And then he thinks about the Prince of Beasts, which is this mythological figure, which we are still learning a little bit about, but we now learn that the Prince of Beasts blinds his acolytes, which is interesting because we know some other character who has already been blinded, at least in one eye in the story, which is Iroh. And Iroh thinks about the legend of the Lord of Blackbirds, And the Lord of Blackbirds is literally a prince of beasts. And the Lord of Blackbirds is someone who apparently recruits young boys and then eats them. So the prince, which mirrors the Prince of Beasts recruiting acolytes and then blinding them. So this might imply that the legends are based off of something else, or there is some kind of connection here. So, and then we learn about more things about the Inquisition, that they have special magic tools, smoke grenades or something like that, sparks, spark powder, something like that, and fell blades whose wounds never truly heal. And this is where we get the beginning of the idea that, yes, there are true orichalcum weapons in this world, and there are reworked orichalcum weapons in this world, and then there are reforged true orichalcum weapons like, say, Fortune, which Ekkin has with him currently, but there apparently are also enchanted blades as an additional level of speciality, and the Inquisition have blades whose blades are enchanted to inflict wounds that don't heal properly. Or maybe they're just serrated. We don't know yet. But Ekkin curses wishful thinking, imagining in turn the statue jumping down from its pedestal to wreak doom upon him should he try such a harebrained assault. And this is just fun. It is nothing terribly significant. It's just Ekkin getting ideas in his head, and he shivered in the waxing breeze. Shivered in the waxing breeze. Those just as soon ceases on spelled wafted familiar smell. And here we get Ekkin's backstory. Oh boy! So Ekkin lives apparently near on the northern edge of the plain of Alaya in the fortress of Mount Viridian. And we learn that Mount Viridian is a mountain, or at least built on terraces up against a mountain. It has 7 terraces of gardens with different types of fruits and vegetables. And at the top is his father, the Lord Eckhart Helster, an old man, and he likes hanging around his flowers. Ekkin has 3 sisters named Carla, Junilla, Ekaterina, and Amara. And Ekkin is the favorite child, and their father, Lord Eckhart Helster, is while he's incredibly loving towards Ekkin, he is incredibly distant to his to 3 of his 4 daughters. Carla, for instance, is not says it screams it's not fair that the father is going to Ekkin, who's not actually his son, and is leaving her, is not paying attention to her. Junilla, who has yet to be sold to the Pockrids because arranged marriage is horrible, only gives him a glance, and then Ekaterina said Ekkin says would have made herself scarce. And Ekaterina and Ekkin have similar names, which suggests a similar naming scheme. So we learned that Lord Eckhart Helster, the true lord of Mount Viridian and all the cavalry, and one of the like great lords of the realm, is a frail old man of about well, if this story happens when Ekkin is 7 and Ekkin's in his early 20s now, then he is in his late 60s. But here he's 50 and looks 60. And he's this weak old man attended by at least his legate, Sir Dolmer, and his daughter, the Lady Amara Helster. And they were everything he was not. So we get that. And there might be other tenants, but we know there are at least these 2 because that's how the language is phrased. So we know that from this description, Lord Eckhart is slow, not cunning. So slow, blunt, frail, and wordy. At least this is Ekkin's perception of him. And we get the confirmation that Eckhart is thin, brittle, and broken. And here we get the story of Lord Eckhart Helster. That apparently Lord Eckhart Helster had been the generational product of countless decisions, debts, and deals. Essentially, generations of planning and crafting and marriages and getting favors were all cashed in for Lord Eckhart Helster, who was meant to be this shaper of the way, if you would, someone meant to lead the Helstrids into the future. And he fails because he marries young and his wife dies young, which is tragic. We really get this idea that this is just the long twilight of Lord Eckhart's life, because everything is downhill from that point. And the Lady Julia dies, and Lord Eckhart is never the same again. And this is the story that Ekkin is growing up with, that his father was going to be this great, absolutely fantastic man, and then he wasn't. And that is the legacy that Ekkin has to live with, and Ekkin has to somehow uphold, that he has to do better than his father, who had literally everything, and then blew it all because of love and because of the tragedy of his wife's death. And of course, because of the whole feudal structure, he remarries, but Lady Caris, who he has three daughters to Lady Julia's one, is this is sort of like the story um, uh, Rachel and Leia, where Leia is the less loved wife, but she has more children, and Julia has only one child. Karis has three, and is in fact described as Julia's rival. Imagine being rival to a dead woman who you can never compare with. And then we get told about how wine is left out for Lady Julia, and her silken glove, which makes us think of another character's silken glove, is left on a chair as if she's just out. This Eckhart seems to be a man who truly is presenting as he is completely unable to move on from this tragedy. And with the math, we know that this tragedy had to have happened like 30 some odd years ago. It happened a long, long time ago. He's still not over it. And then he allows his three daughters, Ekaterina, Junilla, and Carla, to marry, but Amara does not allow to marry. And Amara's name is interesting. Amara actually comes from the Latin amarum, or which is bitterness, with Amara being bitter things, or maybe a bitter thing in the feminine singular, as opposed to the neuter plural. But Amara is literally named for the bitterness in Lord Helster's life. And then they found Ekkin. And so Ekkin really does seem to be the last hope of this clan to try and reclaim what supposedly should have been theirs, or not. And then now we get revealed that the scent is coneflowers. I can remember his and Lord Father had risen and reached up to embrace him, and we get this incredibly loving scene where Ekkin lifts up his shirt and his father kisses where the wound was, and then wanders around on his cane, grabbing things to grind into a poultice to numb Ekkin's pain. And it's an incredibly moving paragraph about just the sheer amount of love and care that Eckhart has for his son, but at the cost of the love for three of his four daughters, even four of his four daughters, because Amara, the image of Lady Julia, he does not allow to marry either. And Eckhart then says, every flower, like all things under the sun, is unique to itself. This is the antithesis of what Corpsand says earlier in the chapter, whereas Corpsand says all people are the same in body but different in spirit. Um, Lord Eckhart is saying all people are different, period, and need to be treated differently. So, are you going to so because everyone needs to be treated differently, are you going to make sure to do that, or are you going to not treat everyone differently? Are you going to treat everyone the same? Are you going to rob people of their individuality? Are you going to pick what you ought to prune and prune what you ought to pick? Even though every single plant in the world requires a different way to be cared for. You must not forget that, my son. And then Ekin says, I will not forget, father. And it's incredibly touching, but also incredibly tragic. So, with that in mind, does Ekin treat people the same, or does Ekin treat people differently? And what are we supposed to do about that? The heavens are creeping towards dawn, but Valerius freaks out. He says Vera's hips. Vera is one of the Numen gods. Vera is this goddess portrayed as a goddess of smiths, cooks, um, weavers. Basically, she is a goddess of all things created by human hands. She's also, however, a virginal goddess. So she's the virginal goddess of craftspersons. So the joke is that hips are associated with childbearing, and Vera's hips are useless because Vera is a goddess without children. Her children, rather than being people or gods, her children are her crafts that she has given to humanity. So he swears upon something useless and says, "We go now." And then Bruno says, "No, we wait." And then, have you done enough waiting? Valerius is freaking out. He calls Isolon a vulture. He calls corpse hands a vulture, which in Latin is Isolon. The joke is that also, so this is a joke. This is where corpse hands names comes from. That corpse hands describes a vulture. Vulture is Isolon in Latin. But speaking of that, coneflowers is Echiniah. So Ekin, even though he is Not really a Hellstar. He actually is a Hellstar because coneflowers are a type of daisy, and daisies are on the Hellstar sigil. That he, Ekkin is a daisy. He is a coneflower, but hidden. And similarly, that Corpse Hands is a vulture, but hidden. But we'll get to more of that later. Um, so with that in mind, he says, we'll die, but either way, but I'd rather not be like dogs. And Ekkin says, I think you need to calm down, which is the thing you're not supposed to say in this situation. And of course, Valerius freaks out even more. He says, you're all for something, you're the one who needs to calm down, which is, and I'm perfectly calm as one ought to give in a current situation, which realistically, don't know what they're doing, and they are corpse and Valerius is saying that they're good as dead men, which then suggests that oh, if we're good as dead men, of course it's okay for us to freak out. But he's also saying we need to keep our heads level. I'm not freaking out, even though he's clearly freaking out. And he says, how are you there? They're 10 and 4 still. And then when they do with surprise, they'll be 10 and 1. And then quick work 8, strategy 5. This is pure copium. This is pure copium. Bro is cope maxing. But and he says, Bruto, you know, proven warriors, what say you? And then Ekkin's trying to say, like, I'm also proven warrior, but his ribs are hurting like hell. Um, why do you doubt our friend? And Bruno is not very eloquent with this, where friend, Valerius thinks he's talking about corpse hands, but Bruno is most likely actually talking about Ekkin. Why do you doubt our friend? You are not mentioning his martial abilities. He's also got the really special sword. And then that gives Valerius an idea. Ekkin says, freaks out at Valerius and says, you gave me your sword, you pressed into your hand. If you didn't want him to succeed, you have cut him down where he was. And Valerius says, he needed it. Imagine what would have happened if I had denied him he had succeeded. Then essentially, Valerius is imagining this situation where Corpse Hand succeeds and then says, hey, it would have been a lot easier if I had your sword. Now I'm going to kill you because I'm mad at you, which is insane. And then if he'd failed, then it would be his fault because he didn't give him the sword, which is more defensible, also kind of insane. So Valerius has clearly in Valerius's mind, Corpse Hands is someone who is incredibly competent, incredibly smart, and also ruthless. And Valerius is very clearly scared shitless of Corpse Hands. And what that will cause him to do, that is a very interesting question. So, Valerius drops to a knee and then says he eventually is trying to word his way around it, but then she admits, I would like the magic sword. I would like a fortune, and I will use it to win the day. And then Ekkin says, absolutely not. And Valerius tries to give a bunch of different arguments, and Ekkin is just incredibly angry at this. Absolutely not. And then we have this Valerius tries to speak, but something inhuman takes its place, which is the sound of geese dying, where one geese cries out, and then more, and then like a plague, a bunch of other geese start crying, and then they see a dark cloud rising, whatever that means. Dun dun dun. And then we get this question: when is a duck a goose? When is a duck a goose? Ducks and geese are different birds. They have different feathers, they have different like sizes and shapes and colors, and they fly differently and things like that. So when is a duck a goose? I thought ducks and geese were the same thing, or whatever have you. So when is a duck a goose? We'll get back to that later, much later. But Bruno realizes that's the signal, and then immediately the guards run past. We have a thunder of sandals, a gaggle of geese, a conspiracy of ravens, a thunder of sandals. And then Ekkin says, don't see us. And then two more guards run after, which are presumably the guards who were like, high out of their minds on the Melis root extract. So Ekkin says, we go now. And then immediately says, hey, either of you Kertari? Because Ekkin does not know Kertari, and this will come up a lot in the next couple of pages. And Bruno says, I know enough. So Ekkin says, do the talking. And they the guards see them, and Ekkin reveals his bigotry towards the Kertari. He says some gift from their god. We learn from Ekkin 3 that he calls their god a god of wind and whispers, whatever that means. But then he also also apparently it is known that the Kertari believe that language, or specifically the Kertari language, is a gift from their god, which suggests that the Kertari think they're a little bit of specialness, or that maybe when their god of the wind created the world or created people, that the god gave different languages to different people of the worlds. But essentially he sneers at the language of the Kertari and says that basically it's a bad gift. and then they kill the two people and drag them somewhere far away from the flames, but there's no key. Ekkin swears, and then in a moment of bravery, goes back and knocks on the door, and then the Kertari mercenary opens it, speaking Navrian because he doesn't know who's going to be other side. Probably Kertari, but could also be Navrian, so speaking Navrian. But Ekkin knows some Navrian, so he at least knows the word for greetings. And then this is actually a bit of a lampshade where Ekkin doesn't hear Bruno coming up behind him, but he must have because he's there now. And then Ekkin has to not turn his head because turning his head would be bad and ruin the ruse. So guard says something and bolted, and then Ekkin, before the doors open, bursts through the door and gores the guard like a boar, which is maybe a reference to something, but also just if someone's stabbed through the belly with a sharp object, why not call it being gored? It's fun. And then the guard falls, with falling to the ground signifying death. And then they get in, who's ready, and then Ekkin says who's ready to become legends. The first man over the wall is in the 8th siege of Green Navria, if you would, calling back the prologue. Bruno unslings his claymore and dips in the dying man's chest, which means Ekkin, even though the man had fallen, the man had not died, which is a bit of a subversion. Most of the time we've got this idea, though, when someone falls on the ground because they've been hurt, they've been wounded, that they're dead, they're out of the story. But now we reveal that Ekkin did not actually kill the mercenary, and this will come back in a bit. Bruno is the one who kills the mercenary. He dips his sword into the dying man's chest. So they go up, and then we break into historical present, which is meant to slow down the narration and give a bit more weight. That this is supposed to be this cinematic fight scene, which is ironic because the more cinematic thing is it just what's about to happen. But basically, we are slowing things down before we get to this next scene. And then his ribs hurt, and then later it says by the gods how his ribs hurt, which is really inside. We're really inside Ekkin's head right now. So we also learned that Bruno is apparently heir to Castle Vycroft, and Valerius probably isn't heir to anything because his dad is the legate to Mount Viridian. So they crumple, and then they finish the third, which is not even described. But this entire time, it's always like the sixth, the sixth, the mercenary. These aren't people in Ekkin's mind. They are just objects to be fought and killed. The lack of Ekkin's humanity for these people is essentially shown that he doesn't really refer to them, the soldiers, as he. He just refers to them as they, or the soldier, or the Kertari. So we really get this idea of the dehumanization going inside Ekkin's mind. And then he yells, "All right, listen up, you shits. Open the gate." And of course, he's speaking in High Norian. They don't know High Norian. And then one of them charges, and Ekkin does a cool thing where he like sidesteps and slashes off their arm. And he calls them the weasel, again, dehumanizing. And then Ekkin sticks fortune in their mouth and cuts out their tongue, but doesn't kill them. And then he manages to shut them up. Ekkin's not even thinking about their lives. He's just thinking about the guard as a source of noise. It is incredibly, incredibly callous. And he says, "The gate, to open the gate." And then he's like, "Oh, right, I'm speaking in High Norian. I'm speaking the wrong language." And then the Vanguard is just completely cowering. They are checked out. He yells, "Open!" And he says, "Useless, useless. I didn't speak in Navrian." But then he realizes he doesn't, although he has a passing grasp of the Navrian language, he doesn't remember the word for gate. He doesn't remember the word for door or open. So in a sort of linguistic circumlocution, he has to say, "Do the thing." Yeah, but that's in a bit. He says, "You speak Norian," to see if they know Norian. He's like, "Norian, English, motherfucker. Do you speak it?" And it doesn't work. So he turns to the other guard to see if maybe they know Norian. Maybe they did, but they can't speak anymore. So Ekkin curses himself again. I can say, "Fuck, I am an idiot. I cut off their tongue." And he says in Navrian, do the thing." And the guard, maybe they do know Navrian, maybe they do know what do the thing means, but they're not in their right head. They just saw their best friend get their arm completely cut off. And the soldier, he's now just completely terrified of his wits by these soldiers who have just charged in. And the Karatari mercenary is petrified until Bruno's sword, Bruno being always the human source of a sort of human conscience for Ekkin. And then Ekkin pulls up the blade and says, "Ask him how many are in the city." And Bruno does, and then says, "Okay, so there was 500 of them, and there was another Karatari troop of 1,000, but now their numbers are 250 and 500 respectively because they've lost half, which means they probably were depleted at some point in some previous battle, maybe in the battle that happened the previous night. And then Ekkin lowers his blade and gives another diss against the Kertari and their religion. He says, "Seems your god, the god of Kertari, has failed you again. Guess he never really loved you in the first place," which is just fucking ouch. This would be like saying to a Navrian, um, Aziz cannot save you, or the Lady Emravid has no love for you. It's just it's just a slap in the face. He says if you wind worshippers now using this as a term of derision against the Kertari really hold him in so high regard, why don't I send you to him right now? Which is very like a crusadery type thing. Oh, if you love your god so much, why don't I send you to them right now? And Bruno, who's been translating for Ekka this entire time, just stares blankly, and which is essentially saying, "Bro, I'm not translating that. Absolutely not." And he says something else, and then the mercenary he starts running to operate the winch. Click, click, click. So Ekkin then basically starts disassociating. He flicks the ball of his blade and looks at the Stroken Guard and then west. And he's like, which is towards the field of battle, and he hears Bruno say captain. Although because Valeris calls him commander, Bruno calls him captain. So captain. Although the sky is brightening, Ekkin is just in his own head, thinking about the like just essentially ranks of demonic legionnaires waiting out their 1,000 eyes as many blades, which is that he suggests that every legionnaire has two blades, perhaps a sword and a sidearm. I think Bruno's still trying to get his captain. Ekkin is like he's disassociating, but he's also like trying to actively ignore what Bruno's trying to say, which is kind of funny. He's like, "Oh, am I a bad person? Is this right?" And his stomach tumbled, which is Ekkin when he's unsure of himself. And then Captain, he's like, "What?" Click, click, click. The time is progressing. Bruno then shows the mercenary is still alive and says all the men deserve to die well, which is sort of a synthesis of Eckhart and Corpse Hand's different messages. And then uh, Mercy kills the guard, but before asking if they wanted to die. And then the mercenary is done, the gates are open, and they are freaking out. They see their friend dead, beheaded, and just faint. And then we see like pet with the petals, the red flowers, the flowers in Ekken's mind. He begins thinking about the petals of the growing torches, 1, 2, 10, 20. And then we get the fire and the sword. And then there are two knights. One wears ruddy armor adorned with scales and lions, a cape gilded purple, the cape being the signal, the office of the holy blades, as well as the swords. Then we see they are Dominic Terrans and Eliador Knox, two characters who have been hyped up in many previous chapters. Eliador Knox is hyped up in Ekkin 2, and then Dominic Terrans is hyped up in Ekkin 2 and Lucian 3. And now here we have them in battle for the first time, and it's really, really cool. So the Magister War, we first get a description of their weapon and then what the weapon does for each of them. The Magister War has a massive, massive ultra great sword, if you would, called City Taker, which in ancient Greek is Heliopolis, which is actually the name of a certain ancient Greek siege weapon. So this weapon is not a sword; it is a siege weapon. It is a thing for taking cities, and it is 4 cubits long and a fifth as wide, which is 4 cubits is 6 feet, and then fifth as wide, so the 6/5, which is a bit more than a foot wide. So this is a thick, long sword, and it is made of reworked orichalcum. It is not a sword; it is a sharpened slab of metal. Um, it was too big to be called a sword, if you would. But we learned that actually in its making, countless other ancestral blades, like, ill omen or fortune, or it's like were sacrificed, and essentially all the lives of these swords and the people they represented were those legacies were erased to create City Taker, which is this abomination of a blade, which is used for one thing only, which is murder, just absolute murder. And then we learned that apparently Nox used this sword to dispatch the survivors of Tegia's Hill, which is where Nox earned his moniker, the Butcher of Tegia's Hill. And now butchery follows with this colossal blade. Nox strikes down someone in a single blow, leaps from his horse, crushes another person, and then just starts carving through people like a butcher. And then he's described as a god of war, leaving behind a sea of his victims' commingled lives, which essentially he is cutting up people so fast and in such power that the blood from the people is funneling out of their bodies and pooling on the ground. With the blood being the life, these people's lives are combining into this like this sea. Their lives are basically being poured into this like afterlife sea of all the souls coming together, and it's perverse. And then one guard raises their shield in place in defense, and then Nox left them with the others, which is their blood in this commingled sea. And then shield and skull and spine split, which is essentially Nox cut them down the middle, going through their entire body, which is that is spooky. And then we have the Knight of the Crown dismantled, whereas Nox is the strength build. Dom Terrence is the strength dex build, the quality build. And he looks at Ekkin and then unsheaths the crown. And then we learn, and then he prays because Dom Terrence is pious. He is a priest. He is a knight. He is the Lord of the Holy Blades, the Lord Prelate of the Holy Blades, and he is ready to do the Emperor's will and make it manifest. And then here we learn about the crown. So the crown is only steel, whereas City Takers reworked Orichalcum. But we learned that actually, according to the Lion and the Grips, which might be reliable, might not be, that Melanthios, the first emperor of the Empire in Noria, apparently in his epiphany, the one that revealed about the nature of the Numen and Munin, in a cave, found two swords, and these swords were called Judgment and Soundless Song. And then we learned from Ekkin 4 that Judgment was lost at some point, and that the Holy Blades were built as a replacement for Judgment, as the same function that Judgment would give, which is protecting the Emperor. So, Melanthius had this sword called Judgment, and Soundless Song was given to Melanthius's companion, Hetairos, Danos the Red. However, Danos the Red lost Soundless Song somehow and was given the crown in its place. So the crown is still a very old sword. Sword is a very storied sword, but it is not Soundless Song. And then, fittingly, Judgment is also lost. So we have these two legendary swords with which the Empire is founded, and they are both lost. But we have the crown. And the crown, this weird thing happens where when it kills someone, the air around the crown shimmers like that above a flame. And then the crown then cuts harder and faster and truer. And then when the next person happens, it happens again. That with every person killed, the crown grows sharper, it grows stronger. And then Dominic is surrounded, and now he's like surrounded by wings of shimmering air, going just cutting through things like a like how like a bird and like their wings slapping against their enemies and just carving through people in a similar way to Lord Nox, but not quite. And then he's wading through his enemies, leaving death in his wake, with enveloped by shimmering wings of shimmering air. It is beautiful and terrifying. And then the tide, which is both like the waters of death, but also the blood, coming up to meet them. The one by one, the defenders threw down their arms and ran. That they are running from death. Death made manifest in these two people. And then Ekkin thinks that the blade is enchanted. That fell means a fell blade is an enchanted blade. And this enchantment that seems to make the crown grow sharper, grow stronger whenever it kills or whenever it draws blood, is really spooky because the fact that Dominic was swinging faster and faster suggests that this power the crown has no upper limit. As long as it is fed more lives, it will grow stronger. And then Aziz looks over the dead god now looks over a dying city, and then we learn that what the distraction was. We knew, but we didn't want to admit it. The temple of Lady Emervid was burning. That Corpse Hands committed a great sacrilege to create this victory. And with that scene of destruction of this city being sacked is the end of the chapter. Next time we will go into Fortuna 4, which is a chapter which is much, much less action-packed, but also cerebral. Fortuna 4 is an interesting chapter, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Bye.